Well, good morning, everyone. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1 to 6 and 9 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 150 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 210 days for an official plan amendment. As you know, or if you don't know, there's a comment sheet that's available at the door for anyone wishing to submit written comments or to sign up to speak on these amendments. And I appreciate council colleagues, if you can, committee colleagues, if you have any motions on any of the items before us today, if you can bring them forward as soon as possible, so that not only we have a chance to look at them, staff has a chance, but more importantly, or as importantly, the folks that are here today. Any declarations of interest? None? Confirmation of minutes from the June 13th meeting. Is that carried? Okay. So just so that you know, we have simultaneous translation services available for items 1 to 5. So, at your pleasure, you can speak en français or in English, and we'll be prepared for that. The first item is the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, 10 Oblatz Avenue, and sites designated mixed-use medium rise in the old Ottawa East Secondary Plan, and we'll be holding that item for presentation and for delegations. Number 2 is the zoning bylaw amendment for 258 Carruthers Avenue in Kitchissippi Ward. I don't have any speakers on it. Is it something simple?
Sorry, I've been known by the community that there's some opposition. I just need to understand that in the course of the next few weeks.
All right. We'll hang on to it, and then you can let me know if we can free it up, because we do have the applicant here if needed. Okay, the third item up will be held because we have speakers in opposition, and the applicant on this item is the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment at 16 and 20 Hamilton Avenue. So that one is held as well. Item number 4 is 716 and 770 Brookfield Road, the zoning bylaw amendment. We have one speaker in opposition. We have many submissions that are positive, but we do have one speaker out today who wants to speak against it. So we'll hold item number 4. Item number 5 is 500 Old St. Patrick Street. I have no one registered to speak. Is this item, do you have any questions? You're prepared to carry it? Okay, thank you. Item number 6, we have one speaker. It is the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 1117 Longfields Drive and 1034 McGarry Terrace. We do have the applicant as represented, but we have a person that is here to speak in opposition, and that item will therefore be held. So item number 6 is held as well. So far, only number 5 is not held. Item number 7 is the front-ending report, March Road Sanitary Sewer and Water Main Canada North Urban Expansion Area. Do you need something? Is that working well?
Try that. That's better.
Does this mic sound better? Okay, it's off. So as we, Mr. O'Connor, we need to have a new sound system for this meeting room where everybody, all of our important standing committees meet, and other committees actually, and it just doesn't function, and that's not appropriate. Is it bad? Can the audience hear what I'm saying? So just a minute. Yeah. I think I'm just hang on, everybody. Okay, just take a pause. I'm going to check into something.
It's on, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is gonna be any better. Yeah, I'm not.
We can't pass that.
No, but, okay.
Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Testing, testing. Testing.
Test, test. Better? So what happened? So Heather has a new job. She's now a supervisor of technical things at the City of Ottawa. Okay, so we always need to have a backup plan, because I would not have gone forward. What we were doing is seeing whether the council chambers were available, because we're going to be here for quite a while. It's not fair, certainly, to have so many people have to stand, but it's not fair, more so even, for people that can't even hear what's going on. What's the point? You might as well have stayed home. Problem is, if we moved there, we wouldn't have any audio feed, so people who are at home wouldn't be able to hear. And certainly, there's a lot of staff that don't come here. They listen at their desks. So for the last time, we're putting in a request, and we do expect to see it in the budget. Money to... What? Money to make this room suitable, or we'll have to consistently move to council. And I'm speaking for all the standing committees. Okay, thank you. So back to where I was on the front-ending report. John Riddell, are you here? John, are you here to speak on 7, or is it 8? Or is it both?
No, I'm not 7. I'm in support, but I just got green comments.
Is this the HST thing?
The HSD and the project.
But I think that's number 8. What's your motion? Where's the motion?
Madam Chair, if I may, I think it's both items that he has concerns with the HST, but the project budget for item 7 is, I think, what he wants to speak to.
Okay. Is Mr. Riddell aware of the motion?
For item 8, yes, he is.
And you want to speak to something else for item number 7? Okay, then. Might want to go back to work, and we'll call you. Okay, we're holding number 7. Okay, Vice Chair Tierney. Vice Chair Tierney. On number 8, we don't have any speakers, but we do have a technical amendment, and this is the front-ending reports, Cambrian Road and Apolloon Way, Delphinus. I don't even know how these names come up. Then this is in Barhaven. Actually, it's in my ward. Bank Street and Dun Skipper Drive, Leitrim Road and Kelly Farm Drive, Robert Grant Avenue and Fernbank Road, Didsbury Drive and Campo Drive, Spratt Road and Borbridge Avenue, and these are front-ending reports.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just go to the therefore be resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council that the name Regional Realty be changed to Leitrim South Holdings Incorporated in the report.
Yeah, and you have the second one. Okay, on that technical amendment, is that carried? Thank you.
And we have a second technical amendment. Therefore, it be resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council that the fourth recommendation be added to the report. 4, that the amendment to the front-end agreement for Shea Road Pump Station be authorized to increase the total funding envelope from $204,403 plus applicable taxes to $3,504,403 plus applicable taxes, and further be resolved that Planning Committee refer the additional reimbursement of HST to the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Department for resolution and report back to Committee and Council in the third quarter of 2019.
Is that carried? Okay, on item number 8, the front-ending reports of all of those areas as amended. Carried. All right. Number 9, we have no speakers. This item is Land Use Constraints Amendment and Leitrim Road Realignment, elevation of Annex 10 within the official plan. Anybody have any questions, or is that carried? Carried? Thank you. Item number 10 is Stormwater Management Guidelines for the Pinecrest Creek, Westboro... What?
Go by this.
Oh, okay, sorry. How did I get into that?
That's an old,
Well, these shouldn't be in here. No, she's stuck my, just throw them out. Number 10 is the removal of properties from the Heritage Register. Hang on, folks, my binder's all put together bass-ackwards, as my mother would say. I'm going to have to rip some stuff out. No, because I've got... Oh, Jesus. Okay, so the removal of the properties from the Heritage Register, 2016, 2018. This is like an annual reporting. Anyone have any questions? We have no speakers.
Not a question, quick comment. These next two items, we should see in midterm governance if we can get these to go straight from built heritage up to council. I don't think they really need to come through planning committee. Anyways, comment.
Okay, so we'll take note of that for the mid-governance. Good point. So is that carried? Carried, thank you. Item number 11 is heritage permits issued through delegated authority, 2017 to 2018. Is that one carried? Okay. Okay, item number 12 is Jeff Leeper Special. Demolition control, 379 Wilmont Avenue. It was a notice of motion last time. And so, is this item carried? Carried. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go back to the beginning. So I'm going to just ask my committee colleagues. As you know, at 12:30 normally I would say to you, do you want to break for lunch? I'm just asking you if you would like to make that decision now so that people who are here, it doesn't have to be at 12:30, it could be before that, okay? It could be like at 11:30 or noon. So right now is not an option, no. This is not school and there is no recess. Well, there is, but not today. So how about we say this, and I'm saying this for the information of people who are here, because we have held virtually, well, absolutely the majority of the items, and we have speakers, so you can use your time wisely and leave, and know that at a certain time we're going to be stopping for half an hour. So I would say let's go for 12, okay? 12 o'clock, that's good? Everybody shaking their head? Steve, good? All right. Set your alarms. Okay, no matter what we're doing, at 12 o'clock, we're taking a break. Okay, so we have a presentation. As I was saying, we're going to have a presentation today, and Erin O'Connell is before us. She's the planner on this file, and with her is Doug James.
Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors. Today we're discussing two particular items that pertain to the Greystone Village subdivision. Just a couple of points in terms of orientation. The Greystone Village subdivision is an Old Ottawa East community between the Rideau River and the east side of Main Street. It's approximately 600 meters south of the Lees Transit Station. It's about 26 acres in size, 93 meters of frontage along Main Street, 475 meters of frontage along the Rideau River. The Des Châtelets building is central to the site. It's existed there since 1885, and it, along with the Ground Allée and forecourt, have been designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There's a series of prominent trees that exist along the Grande Allée proposed to be retained, and the subject site includes up to 6 meters of dumped fill in some areas, which has had the effect of artificially raising the grade. This is the overall concept plan for Greystone Village. 2 buildings were recently proposed, one fronting on Main Street, which is known as Building 2A. I'll use the pointer there, 2A, and 2B circled in the red there. There's an 8-story building under construction right now as 225 Scholastic Drive, and a 9-story building under construction right now at 530 de Mazadon in this area. 2A and 2B submitted zoning bylaw amendments and site plan control applications together in March of 2018. Through the course of the application review, issues arose with the interpretation of the secondary plan provisions related to permitted heights. A decision was made to apply for an official plan amendment to provide clarity for process purposes. As these height provisions only impact the permissions for building 2B at the back, Planning Committee and Council on April 24th approved the zoning amendment for 2A. 2B, where the additional height is being sought, is located approximately 110 meters from the Des Châtelets building, which is located right here. The 2 processes before you today are an official plan amendment to modify wording in the Old Ottawa East Secondary Plan, and then a site-specific zoning amendment to 10 Oblates Avenue for the proposed building of 2B. So I'm going to start with the official plan amendment. There are 3 provisions in the secondary plan that I'd like to draw your attention to, and this is a Schedule A of the land use from the secondary plan. So the first provision that's relevant is within the land use and design policies, and it speaks to no buildings higher than 6 stories in the entire secondary plan area, except for those within the precinct that is known as Greystone Village or the mixed-use center area. The second provision that's of relevance is that building heights within the medium-rise area will not exceed 9 stories. Now, within Greystone Village, there's 2 medium-rise areas. There's a mixed-use medium-rise area and a residential medium-rise area. So the mixed-use medium-rise area, which we're going to be talking about today, is located in the center area of the portion there, and it's sort of a hot pink color on the schedule. The residential medium-rise is the brown color that's adjacent. So, and then within the precinct-specific policies of Greystone Village, there's a reference to a range of building heights between 5 and 9 stories for the residential medium-rise. That's the area shown in brown. There's also a provision that related zoning will reflect transition between heights in this range and buildings in proximity of lower heights. But the policies are silent in terms of a reference to the mixed-use medium-rise designation, except for it belonging within the precinct of Greystone Village and the parent reference in relation to the medium-rise areas. So the contradiction or the conflict in policy is that within the general provisions, there's a reference to both 6 stories and a 9 stories height limit. Also within the secondary plan, it speaks to a variety of residential building types and tenures, complementary architectural treatments, compatibility and transition, and maintaining public access through the site. So now going to the zoning provisions. So this is a slide showing the zoning that's in place right now overlaid with that secondary plan designation. This zoning for Greystone Village was approved in 2015. So there's a few provisions that I would just want to touch base on. The traditional Main Street zoning was put in place for this particular policy or project. That's traditional Main Street with a height limit of 20 meters for the parcel along Main Street. The residential 5th density designation or zoning was put in place on this site here with a maximum building height of 32 meters. And the area around the Des Châtelets building is zoned for general mixed use with a specific height limit based on the height of the Des Châtelets building. So it was put in place with a height above sea level in the zoning to reflect that height of the heritage building. Back to the official plan designation, or in the mixed-use medium-rise, that pink area that we were speaking of, is also zoning that permits a park block. There's zoning up for up to 11 meters for the area that surrounds the forecourt of the Des Châtelets building. And there's also zoning related to a series of townhouses that are under construction right now. The brown, to remind you, is where 9 stories is permitted in the secondary plan designation, and the orange designation in the secondary plan is traditional Main Street, which reflects heights up to 6 stories. So in terms of the staff recommendation, first want to point out that the original application to staff was to reference the general provisions in the secondary plan, that they not exceed building heights in both medium-rise areas not exceed 9 stories. Because there is a mixed-use medium-rise area up here, known as 4 Mann Street, that site was initially signed and notification was sent out related to that. but the staff recommendation now is not to the general provisions, it's to the specific provisions within Greystone Village. So we're not recommending any changes in the secondary plan to that 4-man avenue. So I just wanted to point that out. We're recommending 2 changes as part of the official plan. One is that a range of building heights between 3 and 9 stories be permitted for the mixed-use medium-rise designation within Greystone Village, that pink area. And then to strike from the general provisions that building heights will not exceed in the medium 9 stories because it's not required. It's irrelevant if you go to the more specific provisions related to Greystone Village. And why we're doing this is a few reasons. There is an obvious issue with clarity in the plan currently, and that 2 reference to 6 and 9 stories. The official plan speaks to mid-rise buildings as being up to 9 stories. There's permissions already in place that council has approved with regards to building heights that exceed 6 stories within this designation. And this is a not as a right up to 9 stories across the board. There's zoning provisions that still exist within there, and there's a provision in the secondary plan that relates to transition and compatibility. There's no contradiction as well to other policies within the secondary plan or the official plan that speak to a range of types and tenures, compatibility, and transition provisions. So I'm going to move on to the zoning amendment now, the second part of this application before us. So the current zoning on the subject parcel is traditional Main Street, as I pointed out, with a height limit of 20 meters. That traditional Main Street designation speaks to a broad range of uses, talks about compact, mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented development that provides for access by foot, cycle, transit, and car, and to talk about development standards that will ensure that street continuity, scale, and character along the main street is maintained. Uses are compatible and complement surrounding land uses. So the site-specific zoning amendment, again, is for this building 2B, shown on the right of the screen. It's 120 units proposed in the site. It, together with the project that's been approved at 2A, will contain 244 residential rental units and some retail along the traditional Main Street. There's shared underground parking garage with 270 parking spaces to serve both residential retail uses and a shared access to the site from Oblates Avenue. There's surface parking for the retail, visitor, loading and drop-offs and move-in between the 2 buildings located between them 2. And that will also serve to provide pedestrian access on either side of the parking bays between Oblates Avenue and the future City Park, located along the Ground LA. There's 21 meters proposed between the 2 buildings in terms of separation distance as well. That's created by that mid-block area. The recommended zoning bylaw before you that's site-specific is to amend the portion of the property with a 9-story building to include a height schedule. So that a height schedule is shown on the right, and that includes a variety of setbacks and heights at varying stories. So it locks in those setbacks and stepbacks that have been proposed through the subject proposal. There's also a number of other provisions that are recommended through the zoning amendment, and we can come back to those if we need to discuss further. Just a little bit about the process of this application. As I mentioned before, it was submitted in March of 2018. The proposal on the left shows one of the earlier versions, and the proposal on the right is what's before you today. And I just want to point out some of the changes that were made through the course of the review of the application. The massing of the 9-story building was modified to introduce stepbacks above the 6th story. So above here, this portion of the building was pulled back. Balconies were modified to inset some and remove others. So you'll notice this bay of balconies here has been inset along the right side, and other balconies have been removed further on those upper stories. Kitchen and indoor seating facilities in the rooftop amenity area have been removed completely. Stone was incorporated along the main body of the 9-story building. The datum line was strengthened at the ground floor and above the 6th floor in order to bring the focus to the Des Châtelets building and reduce the impacts of the additional height. And the southern edge of the parking area that abuts the Ground LA increased landscaping was brought into effect to soften that edge. Now this just shows, this is a staff-generated image, so it's not submitted by the applicant, but we put the building in its context to just evaluate really the relationship between the buildings, others surrounding it, and the built form that's proposed. This is an earlier vision of the 9-story building that's shown here, so it doesn't reflect all the changes that were made for the application. But I just wanted to show part of this to talk about why we're supporting this site-specific zoning amendment. Part of the reason is related to the location of the site subject to others in the area. So Main Street, where the 6 stories is permitted, is 75 meters from the site. So this is an interior site related to the Main Street. And the Des Châtelets building is located, as I mentioned, 110 meters from the subject site. So in between the Day Chatelet building and the 9 stories proposed is a new public road, a series of townhomes, or 3-story buildings proposed right now, a public park, and then the Day Chatelet building. The shape and the massing of the building was important to our discussion. It's an L-shaped building with varying setbacks and stepbacks. So it's got a limited frontage along the along the Grand Allée here, and then a series of stepbacks, as I mentioned, above the 6-story. This is, again, back to the original concept plan. The building is set back 6.2 meters from the Grand Allée at grade, and then between 2.7 and 4.2 meters from Oblates Avenue with varying stepbacks as it goes up. We reviewed their transportation study, the sun shadow study, evaluated privacy impacts and the built form impacts of this particular site-specific zoning amendment, and feel that it does not cause undue adverse impact. It is a change. This is a change. It's the zoning amendment before committee and council. We reviewed it again in reference to all the plans and studies that have been proposed, and we feel that it represents good planning moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So as is our habit, we go right to delegations, and I'm going to stick with that today, okay? So first up is Heather Jarrett, followed by Paul Goodkey. Okay, just for everyone's information, so I don't have to repeat it, everybody has 5 minutes to speak and 5 minutes only. If I sense that you're going to go long, I probably will tell you that you have a minute or less, just to give you a heads up so you have the opportunity to wrap up. But I am known to stick to the 5 minutes, and I'm absolutely sticking to the 5 minutes. So welcome, Heather, you're the first one up today, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and council members, for the opportunity to speak in opposition to the proposed amendment. The terms of the secondary plan relevant to this site were negotiated over a period of several years to reach a 3-way compromise amongst the owner of the property on behalf of subsequent developers, staff from the city's planning department, and residents of the community. The intent of the secondary plan was twofold: to protect the historical legacy of St. Paul and the Oblates, and to provide planning predictability for the community, in particular for future residents of the area in question. Any change to the city's legal planning documents must therefore be renegotiated with all 3 parties at the table to again establish a compromise acceptable to all 3. The current application is the wish of the developer only and is not supported by the community. Obviously, the community environment has changed in the time since the approval of the secondary plan. However, these changes were foreseen by the approved plans and have ensued in the manner prescribed by the documents. Development has occurred as part of a whole picture, not piece by piece, and must continue to do so. Changes to the approved secondary plan and the official plan must only be made as part of a comprehensive review process that looks at the community as a whole, that looks at the city as a whole. Changes must not be made piecemeal, as that destroys the integrity of your planning process. The residents of Old Ottawa East are not NIMBYs. They support intensification, but it must occur in a regulated way and within the parameters of approved planning documents. If it does so, the community will support it. In fact, there are already 8 and 9-story buildings in construction on the Greystone property. The community has not objected to these because the buildings respect the approved plans and are in appropriate locations for the height being built. The applicant's request covers other parcels of land near 10 Oblats. It's obvious that the applicant's intention is to change the potential development possibilities of these properties to increase their marketability. The community is justified in fearing that any developer might then cover the land with additional tall buildings, totally inappropriate for these locations. The planning rationale for the Greystone site was that heights of the buildings would slope gradually towards the river, with the Deschâtelet building being the focal point and the tallest structure between Main Street and the Rideau River. This was to ensure a degree of relatability between the structures. The increase in height proposed as a zoning amendment negates that rationale. This application should be rejected for ignoring the intent of the community design plan and the resultant secondary plan. It should be rejected for establishing an unwise precedent for the undeveloped lands covered by the application. It should be rejected for again attempting to destroy the trust of the community in the planning process. Half a minute. This is not just a technical issue. This is a moral issue.
1 minute.
You have approved zoning and secondary plans to provide predictability and assurances to the citizens you represent. You should feel obliged to respect the approved documents, to respect your constituents. City staff that has advised you is not accountable to the citizens of Ottawa. You are. It is your duty to reject this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, I hope that felt good because it's the last time you're doing it.
I have a question for the delegation, please.
Just a minute, Vice Chair. Didn't occur to me to mention the fact that we don't applaud, nor do we boo. We treat people with respect, and I know that you're happy about what Heather had to say. You can put your hand, well, I think the rule at the, what we did with the Salvation Army is we said if you really, really supported it, for the 300 people that came out, you put your hand up and you know, like this. Something silent, but that's not happening. Okay? So Heather, come on back up for a minute because Vice Chair Tierney actually has a question. And then Paul Goodkey, you might as well come up on deck. Where are you, Paul? I see you. And following Paul is John Dance. So Heather, question from Vice Chair Tierney.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation, and clearly you've come together with a really good campaign here. How many stories would you be satisfied with?
6 stories.
Okay, 6 stories.
Yes.
And on the campaign front, I see a lot of bright green. Thank God it's Sunglasses Day today, National Sunglasses Day. Great shirts. Where did these shirts come from? Whose brainchild was this? Good job. That was it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Paul Goodkey, you have 5 minutes, followed by John Dance.
First off, I'm very disappointed to be here today. Secondly, I'd like to say I have great respect for Mr. Hoban and Mr. Chown. They're just doing their job. I've been engaged, along with several other Old Ottawa East community members, in the CDP secondary plan process going back 2007 to 2011. There was a love fest here in 2011, August. I was engaged after with the institutional properties. They were sold. We were sold to the sisters, sold to Domicile, and the Oblates sold to Regional. I've submitted my written comments. I doubt you've had time to read them. They're not complete. But if you have questions about certain items in the staff report, please go to my comments. I've laid it out that way. I didn't know I'd be speaking second today. I pulled out this document, had it scanned. I don't know if you have it. I don't know if it's able to be up there. I guess it is. There it is. Okay, so I've been involved for a long time. This is the concept plan, May 21st, 2014. On the subject property, shows those two brown, everybody see those brown ones? On the subject property, those are indicated to be 3 stories. Can't maybe read it, but look at the actual document that I've passed on that was scanned. And then you have the frontage properties that are 6 stories. So there's four separate buildings on that. There's lots of concepts as we went along, or as regional went along, but they never got higher than 6 stories and never got less than 2 buildings. So I just can't accept this fact that they've put the premise out there that they could build a shoebox. That's what they could build. Okay. I doubt the URDP would be really happy about that. I guess the question, I got to be brief, I only got 5 minutes. The real question is, how do we get from this concept with the high-rise buildings where they should be, 9 stories in the south, even that C1 building on this concept is 6 stories. We've got the same townhouses in front of the Deschâtelet. We've got one building that's 6 stories and can't be any higher than 83.7, which is the height of the Deschâtelet building. How do we get to 9 stories that's 14 meters above the Deschâtelet building? I was going to talk about the URDP comments. I know they don't really mean anything, but believe me, they were disregarded in this process on the subject property. How many minutes have I got left?
1 minute and 4 minutes.
I don't know what else to say. I'm basically, this makes me sick. And I've told Murray Chown that when I came in this morning. I couldn't help but doing so. I don't think I've got anything else to say. I'm just really, really, really disappointed that we've gone from this concept to an approved concept, having 2 buildings on this property, 6 stories high, and they've got the density over the overall site. And the old Ottawa East Community Association said back in 2015, when that concept was approved by council, we're happy the taller buildings are where they should be. And now we have a 9-story where it shouldn't be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No questions? Thank you. Mr. Dance, John Dance, followed by Phyllis Odenbach Sutton, who's president of the Old Ottawa East Community Association. And Mr. Goodkey, I certainly did read them, and I know what you're talking about. We made it easy with the pages. It was really appreciated. Thank you. Mr. Dance?
We'll wait till we get the presentation
Sure.
up, please.
Whenever you're ready.
No, there's no audio in. It's a PowerPoint. This is it. Good, thank you. Oh. Can I click it? Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Thank you very much, Chair. Back in 2012, I think a few of you were there at the planning summit that the mayor had. We need greater predictability and certainty when it comes to development in our city. We all heard that. Maybe the planning department didn't, regional may not have, but the rest of us heard that. We believed Mayor Watson. Key dates in this effort are that in 2005, the CDP process began in Ottawa East. 2011, the CDP secondary plan were approved. 2015, Greystone Village was rezoned, and here we are 4 years later, regional saying, oh no, we didn't mean that. We want a 50% increase in front of Deschâtelet. Okay, that's what's happened here. Now, the realities are that at absolutely no point during the CDP secondary process program was the original zoning of 9 stories to the west of Deschâtelet proposed or discussed, and indeed, had it been everybody, including the property owners, would have rejected it out of the hand, as St. Paul University rejects this crazy proposal. So let's just be quite clear that this was never in the 10 years of preparation of CDP, secondary plan, and the rezoning, was this ever discussed? Secondly, who was involved in this process ever heard of it? I mean, nobody heard of this. City staff cite the ambiguity of the secondary plan, but there was absolutely no intent to allow more than 6 stories west of the Châtelet. Staff didn't even check with the proponents, even their own staff, I'm sure, within the proponents of the CDP secondary plan, to determine intent. They simply decided with the developer's official plan amendment proposal. How is that good planning? You know, Ms. O'Connell speaks of this as being good planning, but it is not good planning when you don't consider what the intent was. Just look at, this is a picture of what the demonstration plan approved by the people who sold the property at discounted price because they didn't want big buildings. This is what it looked like. That was how it was to look, all 6 stories in front of Des Châtelet. Okay? Don't make no mistake about it. This is how it looked from the Grand Palais. You know, the Châtelet residence was foremost. It was the key to this. It wasn't overshadowed. Look at the heights. The heights, it was clearly specified that for the section in front of section C, in front of, I just find my little pointer here. Thanks, Ron. All this section, C, it says up here, 6 stories, 20 meters. This is what was in the demonstration plan. No mistake about it. Okay, and then we move on to Regional's proposal, 4 years later, 2015, and here's what they had. They had 6-story buildings in front of Des Châtelet. This is the zoning you approved. Let's take another look. This is how they had it. What they're proposing, see where it says the purple ones, 6-story condo. That's where they're now proposing a 9-story. This was not consistent with what was ever discussed. Absolutely not. Again, another picture of what they presented just 4 years ago. It was all 20 meters, 6 stories. So, conclusion, so they want regional wants, and the city wants to, this planning staff, I should say, want to revisit something approved just 4 years ago, after a huge amount of effort, free effort, I might add, from the community. We spent a lot of time. This is a waste of staff time, it's a waste of the planning committee's time, and it's a waste of the community's time. It's a squandering of the goodwill that Regional earned. We worked well with them, they were good, but they're just blowing it, and we can't be trusted. This request cannot be what Mayor Watson had in mind when he called for greater certainty and predictability. I got to ask if you've made any progress towards greater certainty and predictability. It appears not. There was no ambiguity whatsoever in the Old Ottawa East secondary plan, CDP. 6-story maximum is what all parties supported. You can't come along 10 years later and say, oh, we didn't mean that. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dance. Thank you for coming out. Phyllis, I see you're there. By the way, you have silent waivers in the back, just telling you. Take a note of that when you stand up.
I would appreciate if my time doesn't start till my slide goes up.
Oh, it won't. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
After you is Peter Tobin, followed by Camrose Burden. So whenever you're ready, just relax. 5 minutes doesn't start till then.
And there was thank you. Sorry, just how does this work?
Yes, it's just one slide.
Yeah, it's one slide. Can it be made any bigger than that? No? Okay. Good morning. My name is Phyllis Odenbach-Sutton, and I am the president of the Old Ottawa East Community Association. Why are we so opposed to this change? There are a number of reasons. I would like to focus on several key ones. Number one, respect for heritage. The original owners of the properties worked with the community in the development of our community design plan. They wanted to ensure that their legacy would not be lost through development that did not respect the key historical feature of this site, the Des Châtelet building. All of the lands east of St. Paul University, which is the brown area on that secondary plan, could have had 9-story buildings as per the community design plan and the secondary plan and subsequent zoning. Regional chose to build low-rise singles and towns on these lands. In doing so, they effectively chose to reduce their ability to build 9-story buildings where they were zoned to be built. Why should the community now allow 9-story buildings elsewhere on the site? Number 2, ambiguity. City staff have suggested that our secondary plan is unclear and that this official plan amendment is all about removing ambiguity. There is no ambiguity with the intent of our secondary plan with respect to building height in this area of the development. But the residents of Old Ottawa East have been faced with ambiguity created by city staff. The staff report indicates that the lands subject to the amendment are those designated as mixed-use, medium-rise in our secondary plan. Those are the pink areas on the slide that is on the graph, and that these lands include part of Greystone Village. But the signage at the 2B site lacks a map of the affected area. It continues to indicate that it was posted on April 9th, 2018, long before an amendment was proposed. So what is the scope of the proposed change? Does it cover all parts of the pink areas of our secondary plan except for Foreman Avenue? Can 9-story buildings really be built in front of, behind, and on either side of the Deschâtelet building? Have the lands owned by St. Paul University had their zoning changed as well, even though it is our understanding that they were not informed by the city? Yes, there is ambiguity, but not as a result of the secondary plan. Number 3, the precedent-setting nature of this application. A number of community members submitted comments expressing their concern that an increase in height for Building 2B would set a precedent for elsewhere in the development. The staff response to this concern is outlined on page 35 of their report. Planning applications do not set precedent. But elsewhere in the staff report, indeed in the planning rationale section, previous planning decisions are used as precedents. For example, on page 16, there is a reference to the retirement residence at 225 Scholastic Drive exceeding 6 stories in height as the result of a minor variance application. This looks a bit inconsistent to us since, in the words of staff, planning applications do not set precedent. In conclusion, the proposal does not represent intensification. The total number of units is relatively unchanged from the original design and from the design approved in 2015. The rationale for this change appears to be based on architectural preference and perhaps the decision to build low-density, single-family homes and townhouses where 9-story buildings were zoned. Old Ottawa East is a community that has experienced and continues to experience significant intensification. We are not averse to change. Indeed, we have invested hundreds of hours voluntarily in the development of our community design plan, which was then turned into a secondary plan. Please respect our approved plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lots of fans behind you on this one. Thank you. Next up, we have Peter Tobin. Peter, there you are. Is Camrose Burden here? Camrose, you'll be next. Thanks very much, everyone, for being respectful of everybody that's in the room. Thank you. Welcome, sir, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. I recognize and thank you for the time and effort you put into your positions, both as city councillors and as members of Planning Committee. Thank you for listening. I plan to be brief. I've tried in vain to find a compelling reason why the applicant's request for this amendment should be accepted. It does not make Old Ottawa East more of a neighborhood, more of a community. It does not enhance the majesty of the Heritage du Châtelet building, and it does not make Main Street more of a traditional Main Street. This request to Planning Committee is properly called an amendment. From my perspective, however, it is not an amendment, but a complete dismantling of the old Ottawa East Community Design Plan and the secondary plan. I do not presume to be able to predict the long-range effects of an approval of this amendment. Here is what I worry about, however. First, that it will make it easier for a proliferation of short-term rentals such as Airbnb. I know the applicant intends to restrict that venture, but Airbnb is notoriously hard to monitor, let alone regulate. As well, promises made can easily be promises broken. Second, approval will inevitably increase the density of Greystone Village in the long term. Parcels of land will be sold off by Regional to other developers who will seek increased height allowances. The added density will aggravate traffic flow in the area, which is already problematic. Finally, an approval in the midst of intense opposition from our community will undermine the confidence and credibility of community associations throughout the city. Thank you for your attention. Please respect approved plans.
Thank you very much. Cam Rose Burden, followed by Barbara Kirk. Thank you, Cam Rose, for sending, you're the first person I've ever met named Cam Rose. Are you from Cam Rose, Alberta?
There's a long story about HMCS Camrose and the Battle of the Atlantic. And for some
Yeah,
reason,
that is
there's a street,
that is a long
in
story.
the city named Camrose, and the archives can't tell me how it came about, but I
Yeah,
have
because
to
it's
say
not near an
named
ocean, that's
me.
for sure. Anyway, thank you for sending in your submission ahead of time, too.
Just a moment, I'm having some trouble here. I'm hearing, oh, I think I'm on the wrong channel. Okay, I think that's better. Are we ready now?
I'm ready whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for your time. I will be brief because much of what I was going to say has been covered so very well by those who spoke before me. I would just like to mention that I am speaking, I will focus on the fact that I am a resident owner of the Corners on Main condominium building, which is located at 11 Oblatz Avenue, which I think that address does not appear in the documentation, but it is directly facing 10 Oblatz. So naturally, I and other resident owners and residents are directly affected by this. It is very disappointing, to say the least, that we should see this request coming from Regional at this point. At the point at which I bought on paper, which was in 2015, all the representation that had ever appeared of what was planned for the adjacent Greystone project indicated 6-story buildings across the street. And that was acceptable, and that also respected the approved secondary plan. So that was an important fact for me in my choice to buy. So I think it's fair to say that as an early bird purchaser and resident, I've actually helped to pave the way for the success of both that domicile project and for the Greystone project. So I have put a lot of faith in both developers, as did the media, as did many others, and I think that Regional certainly has deserved its reputation for dealing in good faith with the community. This proposal, however, is a departure from that. So how much time do I have?
We'll have 2:38.
So I would also just like to mention concerning the concern about impact on future building approvals. Let's say it would not set a precedent. Let's say instead that the result of approving these changes would be a change in the context that would be applied to consideration of the next proposal and the next proposal after that and after that. You don't have to call it a precedent, but you can see how it would cumulatively, that the effect of a precedent would occur. And also, I would like to mention that the staff report focuses on the visibility and prominence of the Deschâtelet building really almost exclusively from the point of view of Main Street at the Grand Allée. And that is appropriate as far as it goes. But surely we should give some consideration to other viewpoints, a pedestrian on Oblots Avenue, a pedestrian on the Grand Allée closer up with this tall building beside. So I would just like to ask you to consider that, to consider all the other points that have been mentioned prior to me, and respect the secondary plan.
Thank you very much, Camrose. Thank you. Barbara Kirk, followed by Alexandra Grupka Macaulay. I'm not even going to ask whether I said that right. Barbara, welcome. Thank you for sending in your submission.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Committee, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for allowing me to speak in opposition to this proposal. My name is Barbara Kirk. I live on Graham Avenue in Old Ottawa East, and I've actually been a resident in that area for over 60 years. Our little area of the city was, for a long time, a very quiet place that nobody really paid much attention to, except if you were trying to get downtown fast via Main Street, or possibly you're familiar with the Green Door Restaurant, very popular spot. However, all that changed when these lands became available for development, and faced with those significant changes to our community, as you know, there was a process that occurred over a period of several years, and that an agreement was reached. It was a deal. Regional was part of the deal, and the deal was approved by the council. Now they're coming back questioning, well, conformity on one aspect, another clause is seeking to change the approved plans. And this is the aspect of Regional's application that I'm objecting to, as well as other areas my colleagues have mentioned, but the breach of trust on Regional's part for not honoring the deal. And I worked for about 20 years in the field of collective bargaining in the federal public sector. And you all have experience as well in bargaining at the municipal level, at the way the process works. Parties propose changes, they discuss counter proposals, and they make trade-offs and concessions. But they bargain in good faith because everybody wants a deal in the end. And for you as elected officials, you yourselves, you're in office because the people in your constituencies voted for you because I thought you were the best person based on your values and your principles who would represent them in office. This was, in effect, a social contract that you have with the people in your constituency. It's a pact, and you would not expect to break that pact, the trust that your constituents have in you. So the Regional's proposal, this deal that they agreed to and that was approved, constitutes a breach of trust. It's kind of like bargaining in bad faith. And you'd wonder how little moral and social responsibilities certain developers have if they continue to make deals and then come back and ask for more changes. If you vote for this amendment, it's almost like you're condoning the behavior that it's okay to make deals because developers are going to come back anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So in conclusion, I would respectfully urge you to deny this application and respect the approved plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kirk. So, Alexandra? Is it Grucha or is it Gruka? Was I right?
Grutza.
Gruka? Macaulay. Welcome.
Thank you.
I meant to ask Ms. Kirk, you said what street you live on, but I didn't hear it. Granham? Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Alexandra Grutza Macaulay. My husband and I purchased a new build home in Old Ottawa East 4 years ago in near proximity to Greystone Village. We love our new adopted neighborhood of Old Ottawa East. Our move was based on a careful study of Old Ottawa East's character, as well as planned developments and changes expected to take place in the community. Before moving to our home in the Old Ottawa East, we spent over 20 years in the beautiful community of Beaverbrook in Canada North. While raising our children in Canada, we experienced massive development and change throughout Canada. Some of these changes were welcomed by residents, but many developments were contested as not respecting zoning and community character. In these cases, residents would hear the same repeated refrain: if the land were to be purchased today, whatever amendment under consideration would not be allowed. However, the developer purchased the land many years ago, and permissions for development have been grandfathered. Imagine our delight then when we saw how very different would be the planning scenario governing the Greystone Village development. We were well aware that times had changed. This was newly purchased land, no more grandfathering. We attended all community consultations related to the urban park at De Châtelet, as well as the opening of the Greystone Presentation Centre, where the plans for the development were on full display. It was like a breath of fresh air. Clearly, all stakeholders were coming together in productive collaboration. Now, however, something fundamental has changed. Rather than continued collaboration, the developer and city planning staff seem to have engaged in a game of create the loophole in order to circumvent the clear intent of the Old Ottawa East secondary plan by suggesting the notion of a contradiction where none in reality exists. With respect to the property in question, Block 2B at 10 Oblatz, when the secondary plan is read in its entirety, there can be no doubt that beginning with the notwithstanding clause in 10.2.1.2, the plan intends a 6-story height limit for this property, and indeed all properties in this quadrant. While it is true that the language of 10.2.1.4 introduces some apparent ambiguity, any changes should support the original intent of the plan, which could not be clearer, that notwithstanding limits defined in the official plan, mixed-use medium-rise in the designated zone will not exceed 6 stories, and that overall, the larger section of Greystone that is bordered by the Rideau River will not exceed 9 stories, since this larger area includes residential medium-rise height limits. The community of Old Ottawa East has a carefully thought-through secondary plan. There is a new developer for the newly purchased, deeply historic Oblate lands. And I request that the Planning Committee today respect the clear intent of the Old Ottawa East secondary plan and uphold the plan's 6-story height limit for Block 2B, 10 Oblatz at Greystone Village. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming out today. Barry Davis, are you here, Barry? And following Barry is Peter Frood.
Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors.
I'm a cyclist. I live on Glengarry Road, and this intersection, Main and Oblats, is part of my regular route. I share the sense of being let down that my neighbors have, and I don't think that our few remaining heritage buildings should be obscured. But my specific point today is about the pedestrian level wind study that was submitted February 20th, 2018, and in particular a sentence, page 11 and in the summary, quote, excluding anomalous localized storm events such as tornadoes and downbursts, no areas over the study site are considered uncomfortable or unsafe. And to me that says, except for the bad stuff, there's no bad stuff. This report was submitted 7 months before the 6 tornadoes that ripped through the west end of Ottawa, and so it doesn't account for those, or the one that was earlier this month in the east end. An anomaly would be one that councilors will recall in 2011 that almost killed somebody at Blues Fest. My point is that I don't think these are anomalous anymore. I think they may be considered low probability, but shouldn't be excluded from planning studies. Back to the intersection, when I was cycling last summer downtown, O'Connor and the Queensway, I saw a front coming through that had been announced on the radio. I took shelter under the Queensway, and a few minutes later I pedaled home through Immaculata, and by the time I got to this intersection, all the construction fencing around the Immaculata field was flattened. They were getting ready to work on that field, and they'd set up this stuff. It was all down. Because of the way the buildings and the field work, any strong winds from those directions are shearing abruptly at the domicile buildings, and that effect is going to increase as development is built further along Main Street. I think that intersection is already feeling like it can be a hazard, and I don't think that hazard should be lost in a wash of seasonal averages. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter Frood, followed by Lorna Kingston. Thanks for sending in a submission ahead of time, Peter.
Thank you. You got it right the second time.
Frood?
Frood, yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the value, perhaps a perspective that I can add to this discussion is really focused on the heritage aspects and the impact of changing the planning from the anticipated 6 to 9 floors, and a consideration of that in relation to some of the other building which is going on in the area. I'd just like to say that my wife and I are residents of the Corners on Main. We moved in basically in July and arrived from Kuujjuaq, Quebec, and doing that. And the method in this is that we needed to be closer to our grandson, who's sitting in the back there, and the people who take care of him. So it's sort of family attractions. In a former working life, I played a leadership role with Parks Canada in finalizing the implementation of the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada, and also working with all provinces and territories to have the standards and guidelines adopted. The standards and guidelines is really a benchmark for sound conservation practice in Canada. It talks as a document about the notion of a cumulative impact, and it also includes a specific standard related to additions to historic places or additions to an environment which have an impact on a place. And I would suggest to the committee that there are cumulative impacts and significant ones which are underway with the site, specifically with reference to the Deschâtelet building, which is a designated building and protected under the Ontario Heritage Act. But also, just as a reminder, St. Paul's and Sacré-Cœur are both on the municipal register of historic places. which provides a very modest level of protection, but it does say that these are important buildings to the history of Ottawa. Now, just looking at it, the elements that I would see that would be part of this would include starting off with the retirement home. It's nominally lower than the Deschâtelet building, but not by much, and it's extremely close to the Deschâtelet building. And the overall impression is that that structure is I look at it and it's bullying and swarming with the Deschâtelet building. It's having an impact on it, and it's an impact on its significance. And it's an unfortunate planning decision that was made, but that's a reality. There's, certainly on the particular site with the planning, there's the proposed townhouses, which will end up looking sort of like a palisade of townhouses around the Deschâtelet building, and the view plane, which the heritage consultants have focused on, is actually very, very narrow, and looking at it. The addition of another 3 floors to Block 2B just reinforces that process, and it's further reinforced by the 9-story building and the other structures which are planned for adjacent to St. Paul's University. At least those buildings are somewhat removed from St. Paul's and showing a little bit of respect for the building, but they nevertheless have an impact and contribute to the overall the overall cumulative impacts on the particular designated building, the Deschâtelet. So I think it's creating a process which is completely inappropriate from a heritage conservation perspective, and certainly sort of reinforces I think the observations that many people have shared with you about keeping to six floors and following through on the original plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And I don't blame you for following the grandchild.
The irony is that my grandchild Logan is a student he just started school at the Francophone school and just around au cœur de ville. And if the negotiations with the school board continue, that he could well be a student in the Deschâtelet building if it is used as a school. So
that would be wonderful.
We're rather invested in the community.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out to committee members that we have Ms. Sally Coots is somewhere here in the room. Should you want to follow up with any heritage questions from one of our heritage experts. So, as I said, our next speaker is Lorna Kingston, and after Lorna, we'll hear from Karen Dufton. Karen is the president of the board of directors of the Corners on Main. Welcome, Lorna.
Thank you, and thank you, councillors. First of all, I want to congratulate Regional Group for their cooperation with the Old Ottawa East Community Association when the project was initially launched. A number of articles extolling this cooperation appeared in the Ottawa Citizen. An article in November 21st to 14th issue of the Citizen by the editor of the home section stated, "The community has worked with the developers to create a village vision for the lucrative chunk of land between Main Street and the Rideau River." The editor goes on to say that the Greystone Village was designed in close collaboration with the Community Association, which spent 5 years holding public meetings and drafting a community development plan. Further on in the article, it states that Regional presented its plan to the community and met loud applause. And the Capital Ward councillor, David Ternachenko, stated that Domicile and Regional read the community design plan and understood what the community wanted with sustainable living and came forward with proposals that were compatible. And I quote him here, "We will be getting intensity without going high." That is very good. The Ottawa Citizen published 3 articles featuring the Greystone project, in 2014, 2015, and 2016, all extolling the cooperation between the developers and the community. People like me read those articles. We looked at the community development plan. We heard about how there was cooperation between the builder and the community's development plan. We believed what we read. We believed what we saw in the presentation center, which was 6-story buildings in that space. They believed what David Chernachenko said about the intensity without going high. They believed that this community had a community development plan that would be respected. What happened to this cooperation with the community and the community plan? Once the Oblates, who had worked so hard to ensure that their vision was respected, had moved out, and after people had bought into this Old Ottawa East based on what they had read and what they had seen with their own eyes, Regional has applied for this change to the zoning bylaw and the official plan. This building will not significantly change the density, but it will destroy our plan. It will create a precedent. It'll block views of the Deschâtelet building that is the centerpiece of the development and block the sun for many residents. In April of this year, City Council passed a climate emergency plan declaration. Staff were directed to review the city's climate change plan and present options to meet the reduction targets for greenhouse gas emissions. Does this application to change the official plan and zoning agree with the climate change initiatives in Ottawa? The ice on the city sidewalks last winter will certainly not be helped by this 9-story building. I've often heard people in Ottawa say that developers own the City Hall, that there's no use in fighting them. Well, I'm not suggesting that this happens here in any way. I would suggest that anyone in the Planning Committee who's received campaign contributions from Development Regional personnel and their families, and there are 4 of you, would agree with the public that there is a perception of conflict of interest if you support this motion. I think it's time that
50
the
seconds.
developers obliged to follow the agreed community plan and the plan they submitted. And I think voters would agree with me.
Thank you. Karen Dufton, please, followed by Ron Rose.
Thank you. I'm going to be brief because a lot of what I had prepared to say has already been said. I think that Lorna Kingston and she somehow pretty much captured everything I wanted to say. I'm speaking on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Corners on Main. It's a 67-unit, 6-story building that will be located across from 10 Oblats. As Lorna noted, most of us bought in the Corners on Main before any shovels had gone into the ground. We read all of the articles in the Citizen, we looked at the community plan, and we made our decision based on what we had read. I think the difference between what I prepared and what Lorna had is she quoted the Citizen, and I quoted the CBC in my comments, which was every bit as positive on the community support, how everyone had worked together, and there was a huge sense that this community would unfold as planned. What I'm going to do is just skip to what I have noted that I don't think has been captured. One of the big concerns that we have is, while everyone has said this won't set a precedent, we look at the convent that's beside us. And when we purchased the 6-story Corners on Main, we knew there would be a 6-story building across from us, and we expected that where the convent was, that too would be a 6-story building. Our big concern is, how do you stop what will go on the vacant lands if there is a 9-story building at 10 Oblats? I don't know what reason you would use to limit the convent development to being 6 stories. And if there's a 9-story building across from the Corners on Main and a 9-story building beside the Corners on Main, that will make a huge difference in terms of the amount of sunlight that we have and wind tunneling. And to come back to what others have said, we will end up not with what we were expecting to purchase, but we will end up with something totally different. Everything that we read when we did our due diligence said that we would be purchasing a 6-story building in a community of low-rise buildings. And for us, the community design was a big part of why we purchased our units before any shovel had gone into the ground. To just echo what everyone said, the sense of disheartenment and disillusion that we had when we barely unpacked our moving boxes and the sign went up across the street requesting the zoning's changed to 9 stories. We'd hardly moved in, and already the community that we had expected and anticipated and planned for, its looks were being changed. We totally support the views of the Old Ottawa East Community Association, and we sincerely hope that city officials will genuinely consider the public interest in good land use planning and look at the community views rather than allow developers to once again change plans midway through. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stefton. Ron Rose, please, followed by Jeff O'Neill. So, sir, can I ask you to turn that other mic off because, and late breaking news on the mics. The whole system is being replaced over the summer so that when the committees come back in the fall, yeah, thank you. Yeah. Oh, Mr. Mark is anyway, go ahead, sir, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and councillors. Today, you've heard from a number of existing residents and their reasons for opposing these proposals. It's also important to provide the view of those who were involved in the original plan, especially when it comes to the area between the Des Châtelet building and Main Street, as well as the importance of preserving the Grand Allée. The original parties were the city, the community, and the landowners. Clearly, the city did not foresee buildings higher than 6 stories because the demonstration plan they initially prepared showed only buildings lower than the Des Châtelet building. The Community Association did not want tall buildings in that area, and we've been pretty clear in expressing that view today. The landowners at the time wanted low buildings and respect for the views of the Des Châtelet building. You have in your package a letter from the rector of the University of St. Paul, one of the original owners of the institutional lands and the current owner of some of the lands that will be affected by this amendment. That letter clearly states, and I quote, "The proposed change to the zoning does not respect the understanding reached among the community, the city, and the landowners." End of quote. The rector also states, again I quote, "At the time, considerable resources were invested towards the development of a demonstration plan for the institutional lands which would preserve the Des Châtelet building and the Grand Allée leading up to the Des Châtelet." End of quote. Therefore, it is clear that none of the parties participating in the original drafting of the community design plan wanted buildings greater than 6 stories in this area. It is also accurate to say that none of the parties involved in the 2015 bylaw application requested buildings in excess of 6 stories in front of the Des Châtelet building. I also want to discuss the matter of predictability and the difficulties caused by ad hoc rezoning. Each member of this planning committee has community associations. Each of those community associations has people who spend a lot of time developing plans for their community, and they expect to hear certainty. I want now just to play a clip that records a conversation between the chair of the Planning Committee many years ago and the city planner, as the chair was looking for certainty that there would not be developers come back looking for greater heights. I repeat, I would like to play.
Maybe you could just reassure me, I'm always, we're zoning, I noticed the zoning bylaws are there that make sure that they conform to the provisions of the CDP. There were, are there any, and I think I've read through the CDP, but are there any areas where there's potential for increased height that the zoning doesn't contemplate that? If you follow what I mean, we've zoned it to a limit, but, because I can just see Mr. Faubert coming back here, interpreting look, I've got a new interpretation of the recently passed CDP.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, yes, we have addressed that concern. In fact, we've included a policy within the community design plan and the secondary plan that states that notwithstanding anything else in the official plan, any other policies that would allow for greater heights, that heights would be limited to 6 stories within this community, other than as identified within the mixed-use center, of course, that would allow taller and more denser development, as well as somewhat on the institutional properties that we were addressing for the demonstration plan, where heights can go up to 9 stories in certain locations, and it's zoned specifically for that.
And it's all crystal clear.
Thank you, sir.
In the plan, there is no.
Turn it off now, please. Thank you. Councillor Blais has a question.
Thank you very much.
Hang on. Councillor Blais has a question for you.
Thank you very much. Certainly, I recognized Peter Hume's voice there. Who was the person answering the question? Do you know?
It was Mr. Langtree.
Mr. who? Mr. Langtree. Sorry, was that person working for the city or was that a consultant?
Former city planner.
Okay, thank you. Former.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for allowing me to play that.
And I saw the smile on Brian Casagrande's face when we heard Ted Faubert named. He's been retired now for a number of years too, but anyway, thank you very much, sir. Jeff O'Neill, followed by Francine Leduc, or Francine Leduc.
Thanks. It's a tough act to follow. So my name is Jeff O'Neill. I'm a resident of the community, and in particular, I'm a resident of the new community of Greystone. I live just a few blocks away in one of the single-family homes there that is in that residential medium-rise area. So a lot's been said already. I'll try to not be too repetitive, but I will go through some of the key points. I apologize in advance for using the standard Government of Canada briefing deck. That's just what I'm used to in my day job here, so I'll fly through these slides. I'm just going to try to tell you a bit of a story and maybe highlight some of the facts that have been brought up so far and that were highlighted in the staff report, as well as some of the preliminary discussions that were had with the parties involved in the discussions. So really what you've heard here is that the applicant and the city are suggesting that there is ambiguity in the secondary plan and that any sort of difference in opinion there leans towards 9 stories on the subject lands. Myself, the community, and as you've probably seen through some submissions, the ward councillor as well, do not believe there is ambiguity with respect to the vision for the subject land. 6 stories seems to be what's there in the official plan, secondary plan policies, as well as all the supporting documentations, including the previous community design plan that was developed through a multilateral process that's been mentioned to date. The background's been gone over before, so I won't dwell on it, but there's a clear storyline here from the initial stages of the planning process up until just before the submission of this application that 20 meters or 6 stories is the agreed to height amongst all parties for the subject lands. Any deviation from 9 stories within the overall Greystone area is highlighted and limited to the residential medium rise, the brown area, if you will, where 2 9 stories are currently under development. There were to be 5 9 stories there, but as was mentioned earlier, the developer opted to build low-rise on half of that site, maybe 2/3 of that, due to market conditions, I imagine, at the time. At the time the CDP was submitted and the secondary plan was approved, it was agreed to by staff that this was good planning and that it was consistent with the provincial policy statement. The language in the one section that's been referred to earlier has led to confusion, but if you read the documents as a suite of policy instruments, it's pretty clear to me and clear to others that 6 stories is the agreed to height in this area. The policies are there, I won't dwell on them, but they are there, and maybe there's some ambiguity, but I don't think there is when you read it as a suite of documents. The current status is that 20 meters is the zoned height for that land and the other lands in the pink zone in front of the Des Chalets building. The areas behind are guided by height above sea level as the grade slopes significantly at the back. So yes, it is 8 stories at the back. It is not 8 stories at the front. And the height respects, although I agree that it does crowd and overpower the heritage features of that building. The 2015 amendment was initiated by Greystone and the developers for EQ, and catchy ringtone there, and it remained at 20 stories. So I guess why wasn't the height changed then? If that was the door to maybe change it, it wasn't changed then. It was only changed, or at least contemplated for change now. So my discussion really is, and others have alluded to this, this is not about height, and we heard earlier, what's the appropriate, what would you want here? 7 stories, 8 stories. It's not about height, it's about policy. 20 stories, 30 stories, it doesn't really matter. It's about a policy that was set through a multilateral process, and that policy, like a thread on a sweater, is being pulled, and we're worried that it will unravel and lead to more of deviation from the original vision, which will basically just erode the whole process that many, many people put a lot of time and effort into. This community is not afraid of height. Height is in the residential area. Height is nearby at the Lee's Mixed-Use Center, where many, 20, 30 stories are contemplated. The city's own urban design review panel expressed concerns with the height. And I wonder if the intent really was for 9 stories in this pink area, then why was a specific provision created within the secondary plan to allow the brown area to not have that provision apply? That would be my policy question. So I think there are 2 options here, the option to approve the applicant's proposal, but I think there's another option here, and that's to take this opportunity to reinforce the original vision of the plans and to cut the loophole, if you were, out of the plan to allow for the original vision to stand for the rest of the development.
Thank you. There are 2 councillors that have questions. First of all, Councillor Blais.
Sure.
And then Councillor Shirelli.
Thank you. So a couple slides ago, you said that wasn't a height question, that it was a policy question. So I guess is your contention that there should not be the opportunity to amend policies based on real-life changes or circumstances, that once policy is set, that it's uniform and universal across the board?
I appreciate that over time, situations evolve. So for example, a policy set 20 years ago, things change, especially in our new fast-growing areas. Those change and they need to be kept up to date. However, this went through an exhaustive process only 5 years ago. The paint is still dry on this document, and I'm not sure that enough has changed with the development of the area to warrant a right turn away from the original intent of this vision. Maybe 15, 20 years from now, it could be revisited, or if it is revisited altogether, it should be a collaborative exercise as the original process was with the community, the landowners, and the city.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Shirelli?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out and ask a question to this delegation and the future ones. Everyone seems to be saying that there was a process that led to an agreement and a secondary plan and part of the official plan. This committee exists for one reason only, and that is to judge changes to existing policy. So if you want to get me interested in your argument, you'll have to tell me what you think is wrong with the proposal of 9 stories other than the fact that it wasn't planned before. I recognize that, but what is it about 9 stories that is worse for the community than 6 stories? And that's the question we have to answer here today.
I guess that's a good question. So my question would be, what's wrong with 6 stories? What's wrong with the planned version?
I asked, we have an application for 9 stories. We have to examine the application for 9 stories. We do not have an application for 6 stories. So we are examining the application for 9 stories. So if you think there's something wrong with 9 stories, you can say that here. So go ahead.
Thank you. I do think there's something wrong with 9 stories. I think it detracts from the heritage feature. I think it detracts from the Grand LA, which is to be the focal point of this. I think through my experiences and through my learning, I'm sorry, I will just put out there that I am a planner, so I have gone through this process before. I think what we want here is a European type feel of the Grand LA, of a view towards a heritage feature, of a consistent street level human scale that respects the views towards that feature. I think we're missing that in some of these areas around the city, and I think this is an opportunity to build that. I think if you have one of these buildings pop up, it just draws your eyes away. And I appreciate the staff's model, but nobody lives 1,000 feet above the ground and looks at the building from that angle. We live, we work, we exist at the street level, and that's where the relationship between built form is established. And I feel that through the initial CDP process, it was agreed to that 6 stories was the appropriate built form for this area. And I think anybody who's traveled throughout North America, Europe, that's a comfortable human scale for people to react with the street, to react with the heritage feature, to draw people in. And I think, and you can already see from that mistake, I will say, of the residential retirement home, that it's already crowding out, it's already distracting from that. So that's water under the bridge, but this is a time to say, okay, enough is enough. Let's just stick with the vision. I live in this neighborhood. I live in one of those little purple houses. This is a wonderful neighborhood. And I applaud the developer and the architect. I thoroughly enjoy living here. This is a great area. I plan on raising my family here, and I plan on walking down that Grand LA as I walk to work every day, participating in that, live, work, play environment. And I just don't feel that's the right decision as a resident and a planner.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, next up is Francine Leduc, followed by Erwin Dreesen. Francine, are you here? Welcome.
Merci. So I will possibly drop in a few French comments here and there. That's how my Franco-Ontario brain works. Bonjour, good morning à tous, Madame Chair, councillors, and attendees. Thank you to the Planning Committee and staff for the opportunity to address the proposal for an official plan amendment to the old Ottawa East Secondary Plan. If I read today's agenda correctly, it includes 3 plan amendments with requests to increase the number of stories in buildings in various parts of the city. It would seem then that the Greystone regional request is not unusual. However, it may point to a citywide problem to which I would like to speak. Is there a limit to that which citizens are invited to participate? Is our participation only valued in the more mundane of tasks? It looks
As a relatively new resident of Old Ottawa East, and in fact Ottawa, I've wondered if it's worth getting involved at all when I see what looks like a lack of respect for citizen planning. Permit me to quote Jane Jacobs, "Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody." Ms. Jacobs, eminent author, journalist, and urbanist, spoke to the value of citizen participation in community building. You, as councillors, I'm sure agree by the very nature of your role here that participation in the life of our neighborhood, our city, makes for a healthier place to live, work, play. In fact, on Councillor Glenn Gower's webpage, I read the following, and I quote, "He challenges all residents to get involved in community activities. Flood your neighborhood rink, join a school council, participate in a fundraiser for a cause. Keep making a positive difference in your neighborhood." These folks are doing that. Old Ottawa East residents spent innumerable hours and considerable efforts creating the 2000 secondary plan. And to be frank, Councillor Chiarelli, I somewhat resent, I understand the function of the committee here, but I resent the fact that we haven't explained to you why we don't want 9 stories. It has been clearly expressed, if you were listening in some of the earlier presentations. Nonetheless, it is my understanding that they are one of the few neighborhoods to have such an in-depth plan. It was created as a collaborative effort, and I commend all those who participated, to provide not only a vision for Old Ottawa East, but also a specific plan for what that vision would look like. Perhaps the others in the room today addressing changes to height restrictions in their areas have done the same. I don't know. Developers do what they're meant to do. They invest, they risk, they hire, contribute as valued partners in city developments. Hopefully they profit also, a necessity for success. Done in partnership with communities and its citizens, this works. In this role, they will push the municipality to give them as much as possible towards the end goal. That is understood. I'm a longtime business owner. I get it. I'm an environmental advocate, have been for more than 40 years. I didn't get this gray without a little bit of work. I get intensification. C'est pas le problème ici. It is then in the councillor's hands to make the right decision by respecting the community plan. And we have explained why we value that community plan. Limit the height to 6 stories. Be the backbone council who sets boundaries for the good of the electorate. Ma mère disait toujours, and I can't say this in English, don't know how. Ambitionnez pas sur le pain béni. Does anybody know what that means? Not really. Okay, so le pain béni means the holy bread, okay? Don't take advantage of the holy bread. And I think this saying seems appropriate given the provenance of this land in the last 130, 40 years or so. I'm not sure how the translators will interpret it, but essentially, don't push your luck. Don't get greedy. There is no doubt that this property was, in a sense, a gift to the developers. I don't mean financially, but it was a gift in the big picture. I fully expect they celebrated the day this deal closed. To date, Regional has been a good partner. Please don't blow it now. In summary, you have before you a committed, intentional community. We know the value of citizens contributing to communities. Old Ottawa residents did so when they created the secondary plan. It is a legacy plan. If you value our volunteered work in school councils, at rinks, on fundraisers, then please respect the plan that is proof positive that you have an engaged, healthy community in Old Ottawa East. Please respect the facts. This is objectively the best decision. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure some people want to ask questions, but they're not going to because I don't know where you would stop. But thank you very much. Next up is Erwin Dreesen, please. Erwin, where'd you go? Oh, there you are. You're sitting in the wrong chair. You've been here so many times. What are you doing?
No.
Yeah, you kind of blend. They're saying it because you don't have the green shirt on, kind of blending into the landscape. Following Irwin is Rick Grimes. Following Rick is MPP Joel Harden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And please note that I speak now on behalf of the Green Space Alliance. I did submit a thing, but I changed the tail end, so I send a revised submission.
Did you say you changed the tail end of what you sent us yesterday? Wasn't it yesterday you
Yes.
sent that? Okay,
So I will send a revised version afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Back in November 2015, when an amendment to the zoning for Greystone Village came forward, I spoke to Planning Committee on behalf of the Green Space Alliance of Canada's capital. We said then that it was a pleasure to be able to praise both the proposal and the process that had led to it. Starting in 2005, the community identified the potential of this land. Even before the developer bought it, the community owned the CDP. In 2011, the CDP was turned into a secondary plan and zoning bylaw amendment. So when the developer came into the picture, its options were clear. When Regional later desired some amendments to the zoning, we praised the company's leadership for realizing that a better way than confrontation and antagonism was dialogue and cooperation. It led to fruitful discussion, compromises were made, the community agreed with the 2015 amendments. This exemplary process, doing intensification smartly, was noted by many, including former Attorney General Yasser Naqvi and, if memory serves, former OMB member Mark Dennis. That was then. Less than 4 years later, last March and today again in modified form, the developer is breaking that agreement, that contract with the community, and the city is facilitating that breach of trust. Legal Services was smart to insist that the secondary plan had to be amended. Since the latest amendments to Ontario's land use planning appeal process are not yet in force, Bill 108, the test on appeal will be whether the requested zoning conforms to the secondary plan. Of course it will, since Council will just have changed it. But that doesn't make what you have before you morally correct. The secondary plan, as it was, represented a community consensus. The community expected that to be respected and rightfully objects to the proposed change. We are in full sympathy with the views expressed by Councillor Menard as reproduced in the staff report. Madam Chair, when staff came forward with a work plan for the new official plan, you wondered why there wasn't more excitement about it. Approving what is before you today will help explain why there isn't more excitement. As Councillor Menard says, and I quote, "How does it look to be allowing an amendment ostensibly because the developer wishes it now, despite years of understanding and agreement between multiple parties? We cannot reasonably go back to residents of Ottawa and say that our official plan will be defended by councillors if this goes ahead. Unfortunately, the city has set a precedent. When the proposal for 900 Albert was approved, Council unilaterally changed the 2013 secondary plan to accommodate it. It was a shocking move. Secondary plans are supposed to be grounded in and reflect the consensus in the community. That amendment, too, was a moral failure on the part of Council for having only listened to the proponent and not having obtained the approval of the community. The proponent deserves severe criticism for letting greed overtake the good sense it had shown scant years ago. If you deny this application, Council will set a new precedent, one that respects agreed-upon plans and respects the integrity of the planning process. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel? And following the MPP for Ottawa Centre, we have the applicant coming up in 3 stages, or we have 3 different speakers. Welcome. Bienvenue.
Thank you.
Merci. Merci à tous mes amis de conseil. C'est excellent pour être ici, comme député ici d'Ottawa Centre. It's a pleasure to be here. Chair, I want to begin by thanking the residents of Old Ottawa East and their leadership because this is what makes our city great, in my opinion. In many occasions, when I've been with the mayor at events, the mayor often cites the fact that our city has the highest per capita amount of volunteerism in the country, the highest per capita amount of donations to charitable causes in the country. And I think we see evidence of people engaged in their city here. What I fear will happen if this variance is approved, Chair, is something other folks have named, but I want to name it in my capacity as MPP, also seeing some legislation currently being debated at Queen's Park, Bill 108, if you're familiar with it. We are moving to a much more combative world, if it isn't already too combative, with debates over development in our community. Section 37 of the Planning Act, development charges, negotiations, and voluntary arrangements between communities and developers and those folks selling land are good practice models on which to build. But what I see if this variance is allowed is a turn to a far more combative world in which the only reasonable conclusion a resident can draw is that they have to use extra-legal disruptive tactics, that institutional tactics won't yield anything. And I'm thinking in particular of what John said, and folks who have been active since 2005 in the development of this community development plan, only to see it, key elements of it abrogated. In my letter to you, I also worry about the commitments made in the community development plan around affordable housing, something that I think is not only important in Ottawa Centre, but across our city. We have a crisis in affordable housing. And I welcome the opportunity today to read into the record my concern that we need to salute and respect developers like the Regional Group who had originally decided to go a collegial route, the Oblates, the old owners, who wanted to fund that by availing to the community resources, legal expertise, planning expertise, so they could work on an equal terrain with the Regional Group, and to have that consolidated into an actual community development plan, which my predecessor, Yasser Naqvi, often said was the envy of the country. When I spoke to Yasser yesterday at the Flora footbridge opening, he reiterated that opinion. And I think, we need to think very seriously about, as the previous speaker said, the message we're sending out to our city, to its residents, when the debate around 900 Albert segues into this particular debate. What is the reasonable conclusion residents can draw insofar as how their voice matters and how they will make it matter in future decisions? I don't want to see a divisive, disruptive, excessively adversarial approach to development. I want to see development work for people. I know I have family members who are in the development business in other provinces where rules are very clear around what ought to be done with respect to municipal plans, what ought to be done with respect to inclusionary zoning. No one that I've heard testify to date, a depute to date, has said that development is inherently wrong or intensification is inherently wrong. We want smart development, and we want our local democratic institutions to mean something. So as the MPP for Ottawa Centre, I'm very happy to be here reinforcing those messages. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to read these opinions formally into the record. And I invite you to consider this opportunity to say to our friends at Regional Group that we respect their work, we respect their engagement to date, but this variance is not something that is good for our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Question, Joel, hang on.
Excuse me.
No?
Yes,
Yes, he does. Is it a question or is it a statement?
it'll be a question. So my
It'll
question.
be a question. Did you hear
Yeah,
that?
my question is, since we sit here to hear applications to make changes to the official plan and to zoning law, that's our only function. What is it about this official plan amendment that you don't like, other than the fact that it would amend it?
Well, thanks for the question, Councillor Chiarelli. What I would say is that in my mind, my understanding of this particular variance being sought is that it is not in good spirit with the community development plan that was developed collegially in good faith with the community and the sellers of the property and the new owners of the property. And that's what I think should motivate a decision to vote against this particular variance.
That's like all amendments, but.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Probably Councillor Leeper, because we're going to the, and just for the record, I did have Rick Grimes here, and I understand that Rick Grimes is here now? So I don't know why were we told that you weren't here? Did you tell somebody that you weren't speaking?
Do my name, but after hearing some of the comments, I would like the opportunity to speak.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair and councillors and Planning Committee and the marvelous audience behind me for the opportunity to speak today. My concern from approving from a 6-story to a 9-story comes into the fact of an emergency response concern. As you know, our roads are getting narrower and our vehicles for emergency response often are getting larger. A 6-story building can mostly be reached with a 30-meter aerial truck ladder from a fire department. When we go up past 6, depending on how close we can get to that building, it brings in obstacles of reaching higher floors. If we cannot reach higher floors and there is a heavy smoke condition or a fire in that building, it increases the risk of morbidity in the people occupying those higher floors. And even though we are seeing traffic calming coming into areas, we're seeing reduction of main arteries, it will then mean a longer response time before you actually have firefighting personnel at a building. So, as I say, I'm in opposition to seeing any increase in height because it becomes a life and death issue for those people on the upper stories, and perhaps also on the ones in the lower stories, because as we get intensification of buildings into areas, it makes it harder to move our vehicles around. The average response for a 6-story building would probably be 2 fire pumps and 1 or 2 aerials, and this would be at the discretion of the district chief who would be on duty at the time, and also the nature of the call, the nature of the weather, and a myriad of other conditions that have to be considered. On a building in the regional development that we're looking at today, it would mean that we would probably, a district chief with good conscience would probably call out for 3 aerial ladders and 2 or 3 pumps, depending again upon conditions and the type of call that we have come in. So I can't in good conscience say to you, yes, go ahead. I can only say, no, I vehemently oppose going from 6 stories to 9 stories on emergency response for the people involved. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, and I just want to let you know that all departments of the city comment on anything that goes forward, including the fire department would have had an opportunity to comment on this.
Yes, I understand. I have been involved in that in my past career. So, but it's just a point to. I retired as a divisional chief, chief of training.
Here,
so,
Ottawa Fire?
I'm sorry?
Ottawa Fire?
We were amalgamated into Ottawa Fire.
Where were
I
you
was
really
from Gloucester originally.
You were Gloucester?
Yes.
I was hoping you were in Nepean. There you go.
No, I worked very closely with Nepean and Ottawa and in regional development of vehicles for the whole area.
Just say you're Nepean and she can't vote against you. Just say you're Nepean.
I also remember people
anytime that Rick and I know that since amalgamation, and it was, of course, so contentious. Not if you lived in Ottawa, because the gravy train pulled up to your station. However, for us in Nepean, in Gloucester, anytime you get to say Nepean this many years after, it's a good day. Thank you very much.
Well, I worked very closely with the both police and fire in Gloucester and Nepean. Sorry?
We built a bridge now to make it better, the Vimy Bridge out in Barrhaven.
It did take a long time, though, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Thanks very much, sir. Okay. So just so y'all know, it's 25 to 12, and so we're we're going to continue on. And next up, I have Mr. Cohen, who is speaking on behalf of the applicant. Oh, yeah, and while you're coming up, Councillor Leeper is moving a couple of motions for Councillor Menard. So, because just so you all know in the audience, he's not on the committee, so he doesn't get to move motions at the committee. So Councillor Leeper is sponsoring him.
I lost the motion.
And I do want the, you haven't seen them? Oh, sorry, so so this is why I probably should have said it a lot sooner, but I assumed that everybody had copies of it. The applicant doesn't have copies of these motions, so can we make sure that we get them a copy right now?
I
There's
have
only
just
one? I
the
thought
one
there was
motion.
two.
One
Who's
motion.
clear? Okay, so there's one motion.
Fair enough.
Have you read it, though? You must have read it. We've had access to it. On the shared drive? Has everybody? It's in the shared drive.
It's in the shared drive.
All right, so before, just let's take a moment here, okay? Like, let's take a little bit of a break.
Like 10 minutes?
We need about 5 copies, plus one for Councillor Leeper. I mean, Councillor Nussbaum. Have you seen it yet? Who needs a copy of this?
Councillor Nussbaum's not here.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break, okay?
Right on.
It's only fair, so anybody that nature's calling to? Okay. Hey, do you have to go? Okay, 5 minutes is up. Where's that stick? So we do have to get a, how come Peter used to have a gavel?
Can everybody please return to your seats?
That sounded like a rap song, the beginning of a rap song. All right. So you signed up individually as speakers. So I called Alan up. Barry Hoban has signed up. Murray Chown has signed up. I know we have other regional folks that are here that are representing themselves, but they haven't registered. So I presume you're here for if there's questions that on history or something like that? Okay. All right. So as you know, you each have 5 minutes, and I'll allow that to play out however you want to merge them together, link them, or whether you have a presentation or whatever, but you still only have the same rules as everybody else. Oh yeah, before you do that, the reason we took the break is for the motion. And after the motion, after you do that, I'm going to, before we go to the applicant, I'm going to go to Ms. O'Connell and ask her to tell us what the difference is, okay? So over to you, Councillor Leeper.
So this is on behalf of Councillor Menard, moving whereas the report recommends an official plan amendment to the Old Ottawa East Secondary Plan Policy, section 10.3.4.4.f, I like that, to permit a range of buildings between 3 and 9 stories in mixed-use medium-rise designation within Greystone Village. And whereas the official plan amendment is a departure from the widespread agreement put in place just a few short years ago. And whereas there are concerns with implications for the recommendation on design, density, and heritage aspects, and whereas there are recognized challenges with the current wording of the Old Ottawa East Secondary Plan in reference to permitted heights, and whereas the secondary plan should not permit buildings greater than 6 stories in the mixed-use medium-rise designation within Greystone Village. Therefore, be it resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council that Document 2, Part B, details of the official plan amendment to the Old Ottawa East Secondary Plan be deleted and replaced with the following. The following change is hereby made to the official plan of the City of Ottawa. 1. The Old Ottawa East Secondary Plan, Section 10.3.4.4.f. is hereby amended, I could do that all day, is hereby amended to add the following text, quote unquote, and between 3 to 6 stories in the mixed-use medium-rise designation following the words residential medium-rise designation in the first sentence. 2, the Old Ottawa East Secondary Plan, Section 10.2.1.4 is hereby amended to remove the text, and in the medium-rise area will not exceed 9 stories.
Okay, so you're good, Councillor Menard, so you move that on behalf of Councillor Menard. All right, so I'm going over to Ms. O'Connell, as I said, and I'm going to ask you, did you draft this?
I did draft it, Madam Chair.
And so this is not your recommendation, however, though?
It is not. The departmental recommendation is found in the staff report.
Okay, so just for the record of everybody, pretty much always when a councillor is very passionate, supportive, et cetera, not only the community but of a particular item, we will go to staff to ask them to help us with the drafting so that we make sure that the legal speak, et cetera, is all right. I'm sure all of us at one point or another have or will do that. I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that, but I think it's important that you tell us what's the difference between what you did recommend and what does this do, as just as simple language as you possibly can.
The difference, Madam Chair, is our recommendation recommends a range of building heights between 3 and 9 stories. The motion recommendation to provide that range between 3 and 6 stories would have the effect of not permitting the site-specific zoning amendment that's before us today for the 9-story building at 2B. That would not be permitted if this language was adopted in the secondary plan. As well, the language now in the secondary plan, if the range between 3 to 6 stories was adopted, it would also have the effect of being in contradiction to zoning amendments that have already been approved by this planning committee and council, where there is a building right now that is within that designation that has zoning permitted for 9 stories, as well as an 8-story building under construction right now adjacent to the Day Chatelet building within the same designation.
Okay. A question on, because sorry, the applicant's going to make their presentation. Did you have a question about the motion? Then go ahead and ask it.
So it's maybe for legal instead. This would open the OP and allow the make the OP subject to appeal, or the secondary plan, I should say.
Madam Chair, the official plan amendment will be subject to appeal regardless if this amendment is, if the staff recommended version is adopted, or if the one Ms. O'Connell just read is adopted, it's subject to appeal in any event.
That's fair, but one appeal will be defended by our staff, and one appeal will require to be defended by outside consultants?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
All right, that's it? We're all clear on the motion? Okay. Okay, welcome. And just for the record, we have before us Alan Cohen, Barry Hoban, and Murray Chown.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of committee. Thank you. I'll start briefly by making reference to Councillor Chiarelli's question, which I think is the pertinent question.
Yeah.
And that is, what is, if you're speaking against the proposal, wrong with the proposal? And from our side, through you, Madam Chair, Councillor, the question is, why is the proposal appropriate and why does it represent good land use planning? That is the reason I'm flanked by Mr. Hoban and Mr. Chown, who will speak, I'm sure, eloquently to those points. I want to have you, if you would, see the world through my client's eyes for about 90 seconds. In 2011, it had its CDP brought before you or your predecessors, and that CDP was approved. Very, very shortly thereafter, a change was made to the CDP with the result that a 9-story area was converted to a 3-story area. There was no tumult, there was no clamor, there was no suggestion that one couldn't deviate from an approved CDP. A few years after that, our client came forward to seek a rezoning to 9 stories on a parcel of land with the designation that the subject parcel has. That was recommended for approval by your staff and was said to be in conformity with the OP, and council passed that bylaw. Subsequent to that, my client came back and sought a rezoning from a 6-story to a 7-story. Again, same designation. Again, recommended for approval to your council. Again, your council passed the bylaw. Then the matter went to the Committee of Adjustment to be lifted from effectively 7 to 8 stories with a geodetic reference. And that went through, Madam Chair. Little wonder that my client was strongly of the view that 9 stories is in conformity with the official plan for this site. That is not precedent. That's simply a history of opinions that have been advocated to you and which you have accepted. So we applied for an OPA for clarity's sake, but being of the strong opinion that there is conformity. Finally, Madam Chair, with respect to the motion, I think Murray will speak to it, but it is a downzoning, not only prohibiting, as Ms. O'Connell said, the rezoning of this site, but effectively downzoning other properties within Greystone, and I submit to you that little notice not too fair, inappropriate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Who's next? Barry?
Madam Chair, members of Planning
This is
Committee.
Barry Hoban for the audience. I know you're behind him.
I'm Barry Hoban. I'm responsible for this plan. I should be wearing a green T-shirt because contrary, when we look at what's being spoken to today, it's such a small part of the overall plan. But the basic planning principles which are behind it have been subject of great consultation and of considered response, both from a design perspective and what we have before us. What you'll see on the screen is the original CDB plan, which we thought was absolutely and utterly ridiculous. It did not reflect the fine-grained nature of adjoining neighborhoods. If I can move this. When we actually came up with a plan, this master plan framework, by the way, it was very interesting to see Paul Goodkey show various other iterations of the same plan. There have been numerous changes to this plan, nuances, but the principles are very much the same. And if I just took you through, so when people say they don't want to see the plan change, I've just wondered, they don't want to see the fine-grained response that's there, or they want to see these blocks on the plan not being interrupted. This is the planning framework within which we basically have two buildings which are currently above the 6-story limit. But more importantly, I'll go back to basic planning principles. What we thought was absolutely essential in creating a modern infill neighborhood was actually to solve some of the problems which existed in adjoining neighborhoods. So Councillor Menard's ward has very few opportunities for apartment and row house dwellings. Same thing happens in a lot of other downtown wards. There's problems. So our whole idea with this scheme was, in fact, even though the mid-rise residential area could build 9 stories, we thought it was important actually to extend the low-rise profile into the neighborhood, and housing diversity being absolutely important, which includes not only townhouse, singles, semis, condos, as well as rental accommodation. And the subject of this particular project is a rental accommodation building. That includes something as simple as providing low-rise singles. This was the visualization of the phase 1 of this, which you can see before you as a combination of singles and rows and our 9-story condominium buildings at the back. Phyllis mentioned we were possibly trying to cobble back some of the density we lost here. That's not the case. In fact, we just felt that it was important to have diversity of form to attract a variety of people to this neighborhood. So what's important to this is that, the master plan has gone through a few iterations, and at this point in time, what we had drawn actually was executed pretty close to what we had contemplated. The reality is other parts of the site were subject to further analysis, and when we moved to the mid-rise sections of the building where we had mixed use and mid-rise, it caused us to look at things in a slightly different way. And particularly the building that we're talking about today is called 2B, and the context of other buildings which are higher form, 9 stories, you can see that they are highlighted in the yellow. The top piece is the retirement home, which is, I think, only 8 levels. But, how do we get there? What is it that would cause us to make adjustments to the plan? And I'm going to tell you that there are some really strong physical reasons why we moved and shaped the building this way. Phyllis Ricard called it architectural whatever. I don't think she used arrogance. I think she used the term architectural whatever. It is architecture, and it's about form. So there are a number of things which shape 2B. So you can see Main Street, which is here, the Grand Allée, which leads you to the Deschâtelet building, and Oblats Avenue. The key factors in terms of shaping this parcel, the greater relief required along the Grand Allée because of the tree ball that needs to be protected in order to save those trees, the tightness of Oblats Avenue, which is extremely narrow, and the notion of further definition of the components on the site. just to highlight that. So if you look at the parcel of land that's out in yellow, the trees, which form a substantial part of the Grand Allée, required an additional 6-meter setback. Old Blatz Avenue in number 2 is a very narrow, constrained street. And then we look at the length of the entire block, and we felt it was important to actually respect the notion of block cadence. So in Councillor Menard's ward, if you walk between 5th and 1st Avenue, every one of those blocks is 60 meters deep. It allows for a cadence of buildings. Filling this in with a much tighter thing would have been inappropriate. So we then began to look at the massing, and the massing required us to do offsets, and the natural result of that is as we offset and created grade separation, we added some height to the last block. It's not about a density increase. It's about quality of design and how design makes for a better neighborhood, which includes the pedestrian realm, the porosity of the site, and access to a major heritage piece, which is the Grand Allée. So we end up with a scheme that looks something like this. And this is the actual scheme. You can see the Grand Allée leading to the Deschâtelet building. And it's important to note the Deschâtelet building, in reality, is framed by those trees. So when I'm showing it here as being wide like this, you actually can't see it. So that's the ultimate build-out but what shapes it from a design perspective? So from a design perspective, everything along here is set back because of respect for the trees and the preservation of those trees. Secondly is the notion of datum line, which we feel incredibly important as you're respecting the Grand Allée, that be a one level thing and then an offset. There's a 6-story datum line which exists and reinforces the Grand Allée. The additional height is that little piece that's back there. But in addition to that, there's a separation between his of 21.4 meters. And I'll tell you why that's important. So the setback, not in addition to this datum, it actually checks back.
Hang on a second. Not again. Everybody was respectful of everyone else. That's not changing. Go ahead, Mr. Hoban. As I said at the beginning, I guess you weren't listening, that each of them have signed up independently. There's other people here to speak if there's questions. But just like each of you had 5 minutes, each of them has 5 minutes. Mr. Cohen did not take 5 minutes, so we added his piece to what's doing there. They have 15 minutes in total for their presentation. One person could have come up and spoke for 5 minutes. The rules are the same. I'm very consistent about that.
As part of the respect for the Grand Allée is not to do a continuous wall, but actually to create a cadence of building blocks along here so that there was an interruption and some celebration of the way that this building is designed to basically advantage the views to the Grand Allée. One of my favorite things is to talk about the TM offset, which in the yellow is what's prescribed in most zoning templates and cross-sections, which I believe to be totally inappropriate for most main streets in Ottawa. And that is exampled by 2 projects. One is 1140 Wellington in Councillor Leaper's ward, and the other, both in Councillor Leaper's ward, which is basically dealing with the 1-story offset. Our city would be better informed to actually use this kind of cross-section. The idea basically that we have a very long block and that we would have 2 different building textures and identities was foundational in doing that. And here is the actual plan. So 2A and 2B, the separation between these 2 buildings is absolutely essential because Old Blatz Avenue is too narrow to allow any parking and loading to occur on it. So we actually separated the buildings 21 meters apart so that would serve as a way of both providing servicing and garbage and provide some level of teaser parking that would support ultimately a grocery store in 2A. So this looking at that same view at night, so you get the idea of that. Again, the offset at the ground floor being absolutely important. A view of looking at the separation between the 2 things. This came up at the UDRP panel, the notion of animating this corner and greening this up. This does provide access through here from the building, from those that live in the corners. It actually provides visual access for the people who live in the corners. And if you notice, the edge of the corners building is right at this break, and from then on is where 2B is where the added height is, and those buildings are not, the buildings to the east are not affected. That offset that we use on the ground plane exists on Oblats as well, because we felt it's important from a public realm and pedestrian perspective. Ground floor animation, absolutely essential in terms of making Main Street into something more vibrant than it is today. I'm just going to look at the impacts of the 2B. Obviously, from Springhurst, there's no impact because you can't see it above the Corners building. And if you look at the heritage impact, I've heard a couple of comments about the heritage impact of a 9-story on the Deschâtelet building. That's 125 meters away from Block 2B to Deschâtelet, and not to mention there's a 3.5-story ringed circle of townhouses in between. You can see that this image is taken from the big lawn in front of the Grand LA. You can just see the top of the 2B building, but this is the one that's more hilarious. If you actually looked at the distance between 2B and the Deschâtelet building, it's essentially the football field at Lansdowne Park. Come on. This is a long ways away. In terms of heritage impact, this has no impact with respect to the Deschâtelet building. Those are my key points. I think Erin had mentioned in her presentation, and there's evidence on file, about the shadow impacts being absolutely minimal. In fact, it's enhanced by creating the increased break between 2A and 2B. Sorry to speak so fast, but I want to leave some time for Mr.
Because you only have a minute and 20 seconds. Go on fast, Murray.
I'm going to have to go very fast with a minute and 20 seconds. What I wanted to say is that when we prepared our planning rationale in support of the site plan and zoning applications that were filed more than a year ago, we came to the conclusion that the applications for site plan and rezoning fully conform to the secondary plan, and that opinion is clearly supported by staff. And that's where we have a difference of opinion with the community association. So this is very dry stuff, but I want to be abundantly clear as to how we arrived at that conclusion. Section 10.2.1 of the secondary plan is called General Land Use and Design Policies. So this section applies throughout the Old Ottawa East secondary plan. Policy 10.2.14 says, building heights within the low-rise residential area will not exceed 4 stories, and in the medium-rise area will not exceed 9 stories. So if I just stop there, that tells me that in the medium-rise designation, I'm allowed to go to 9 stories. Policy 2 says, notwithstanding blah, 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 no buildings will be allowed higher than 6 stories or 20 meters. So what that tells me is the other designations not covered by 4 are limited to 6 stories. Those would be traditional Main Street, and those would be the institutional designations. Then policy 2 goes on to refer to 10.3.4, which I'm done.
That's it. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. I know Councillor Hubley is the first one that has questions of the applicant. We are going to take our half-an-hour break, as I said. We're 5 minutes past the time, so I'll expect everybody back here at 12:35. Please come back, and then you'll be up here for questions. Anyone else want to be on the list as we're leaving? Okay. Okay, of the applicant, though. Applicant? Okay, thanks, everybody.